Hi boys and girls. You might notice my special hat today. It's not my Easter hat. I'm wearing this hat in honor of Earth Day. It's a special day that happens this week on April 22nd. It's when we celebrate the birth of the Earth. So in honor of that, I thought all of our science lab on locations could plant something in honor of Earth Day. So whether you plant seeds, plants, flowers, vegetables, herbs, whether you plant it in a pot, container, or the ground, let's get busy planting in honor of the earth. So as I said, we're celebrating Earth Day this week. And in honor of Earth Day, I'd like for us to plant something. So you can plant either seeds, and these seeds happen to be flower seeds, just what I would like to plant in my yard. Sunflowers, zinnias, 4 o'clocks. If you don't want to plant seeds, then perhaps your mom would get you some kind of plant. I have tomato plants. If you don't want to plant tomato plants, another option would be herbs. Herbs are so nice. Your parents could use those for cooking. I happen to have rosemary. I happen to have basil. If you don't want to plant seeds, another thing you could plant would be flowers. Either a pack like this or a big flower. What you plant is not important as much as the fact that we celebrate our earth and plant something. Some of the items you will need to do your planting will be a small shovel. If you don't have a shovel, a large spoon would work. I happen to have a little thing to scratch up some soil. If you don't have something like this, that's all right. You can use your shovel or your spoon. Another item you would need would be either a pot. I have a plastic pot. If you have a clay pot, that's fine. If you want to plant it directly in the ground, that's fine. So you just have to have something that you're going to plant in. We could also plant in a flower bed. Another thing that we're going to need as part of our STEM lesson for Earth Day will be something to measure with. If you have a yardstick, that will work. If you have a ruler, that will work. If you have a tape measure, that will work too. You'll use your paper, but I have my whiteboard, and I just wrote Happy Earth Day, April 22nd. We're going to use for our first example our plant. We're going to plant a flower, and we're going to plant it in a pot. But to incorporate some STEM elements, I'd like for you to measure the circumference of your pot. The circumference is the area around the size of the pot. So I'm going to measure this particular pot, and I need my tape measure so that it can go around, and it's 20 inches. 20 inches for this pot. Now, we can also measure the diameter of the pot, and the diameter of the pot is 8 inches. So this is what is called an 8-inch pot for the diameter, and the circumference is 20 inches. I have a different kind of flower bed. This is just a raised little planter. It's 24 inches long, and it is 17 inches wide. But if you get a look down inside, you can see that I'm actually going to plant in a pot. The pot happens to be a 10-inch pot. The diameter is 10 inches. We're going to plant our flowers in this. These flowers, when you pull it up, it has a smaller area for roots. So this might be something better for you to plant. You can see that the smaller area of the root, but it has a lot of roots. This is 3 inches. 3 inches. So I'm going to plant in our pot, and I'm going to dig my hole about 3 inches. So that I can plant one plant down in my 3-inch hole. And there's my 3-inch hole. And here's my plant. Now the plant parts on this include roots, stem, leaf, and flower. Those were our plant parts that we discussed. And this pot will hold 4, so I'm putting one sort of on one side, and we'll plant all 4 of them in this pot. I'm going to move the soil and push it down in, and there's one, and we'll plant the others. Boys and girls, we're going to measure so that we know how deep to dig our hole. If you're planting a plant, we're going to measure the distance of the cup. So this is 4 inches. So what that means is I want my hole to be about 4 inches. So I'm going to dig my hole about 4 inches deep and pile my soil up. Remember, we don't call it dirt. It's only dirt if it's under your fingernails or on your clothes. Anytime else we call it soil. So I'm digging my soil and I'm measuring about 4 inches. Our hole is about 4 inches, which is about the size of our basil plant. So I'm going to submerge my plant and use some of the soil to put around my plant. This pot is big enough for 2 basil plants. So I'm going to plant another one right beside it. Some people might want to put gloves on. I never put gloves on because the soil under my fingernails doesn't bother me. So I've got another hole. I'm going to measure just to be sure. It's about 4 inches. And now I'll put my other basil plant in. We want to be careful when we pull it out of our cup and look at the roots. We talked about plant parts, roots, stems, and leaves. We can see the roots, we can see the stems, and we can see the leaves. With basil, what you eat is the leaves. So we're submerging our plant, and I'm going to cover the root part with some soil. Remember, you can do this in the ground. You can do it in any size pot. You can do 1 plant in an 8-inch pot. I happen to do 2 here in this pot, which is larger and is 13 inches. So I have enough room for 2. And I'm just going to make sure it gets spread with soil. And there's our basil. I happen to have a little marker which tell me what the plant is. So I'm going to put my little sign in that says basil, and we'll make salads with this, and we'll make pizzas with basil on it and mozzarella cheese, and they'll be delicious all summer. What we'll do is come out anytime we want some basil, and we'll pinch off the leaves. If your parents use herbs, feel free to pick an herb. We have some other herbs that we're already growing. We have oregano, we have parsley, we have chives, and I use these for cooking. So if you don't want to plant a flower, plant an herb. If you don't want to plant an herb, plant a tomato plant. If you don't want to plant plants, then by all means buy some seeds. But be sure and keep your measurements so that we can do our STEM lesson together as we're each in our homes. Boys and girls, if you're planting in a flower bed or even in a flower bed that's in the ground, I want you to be sure and measure that to put that on your record log. So this one happens to be 36 inches wide. My flower bed, 36 inches wide. And we're going to measure the length of our flower bed. But because I have my tape measure, I'm going to put my tape measure down and measure it with my tape measure. And my tape measure says 144 inches. 144 inches. So 36 inches wide, 144 inches long. Another thing you want to be able to measure is how deep your hole is if you're going to plant your plant. We want to measure how deep our hole is. Boys and girls, on your chart, the piece of paper that you're using, but for me it's my whiteboard, we wanted to list some of our measurements and what we planted. Today we've discussed planting a flower, herbs, or seeds. We've measured our pots. Some of them were 8 inches, others were different measurements, but the diameter is the distance across the top, and the circumference is the distance around. So you're going to make sure you take those 2 measurements of whatever pot you're using. If you decide to do a bed, You're not going to measure around, you're going to measure the distance wide. Ours was 36 inches. You're going to measure the distance in length, and ours was 144. Measure whichever container or area of the ground that you use. Of our seeds, we planted sunflower, zinnia, 4 o'clock. Make your choice for whatever it is that you would be interested in planting. Remember, the important thing is to plant something for our Earth Day celebration.